welcome to ED&A for our last meeting for this year. And in addition to the 5 bills to exec, I have 4 Senate messages that I wanted to go over with you. The first one on House Bill 428, which is the building code. You've got a side-by-side. And Representative Pearson has noticed that it's got a retroactive provision that's unconstitutional. So he's convinced me we should recommend a non-concur and request a committee conference to fix the dates because they appear to be invalid.
I'll move that.
Okay.
One second.
Okay. Any objections? All right, I will go for that one. And Pearson, Sheehan, because she's already done so much work on it. Any other 2 that are interested?
Oh, you put me on.
Okay, you don't want to be overworked, Jackie. Anyone else? All right, I'll go on. That's some moderate interest. All right, and House Bill 156, the Advisory Committee on State Procurement. That's where the Committee on Agriculture came in and said we need a study committee. We agreed to the study committee, but used it to replace a moribund existing committee on procurement that we then repealed. The Senate decided that they couldn't afford to give up that committee.
The president of the Senate is the chair of that committee.
Yes, the president of the Senate is chair of that committee, and she is not going to let us get rid of her because apparently when you need it badly and immediately. So, and what they did is they completely rewrote the bill to create a permanent subcommittee of that moribund committee that is dealing with food. And I think we should just non-concur and let the agricultural people come back next year if they still need a study. I'm not going to go head-to-head with Sharon Carson on a committee she wants. Any objections?
Are you saying that we concur?
No,
No,
non-concur. I don't want to create a permanent subcommittee on this procurement stuff. I said, just let it die. The Bixby and the rest of the agriculture people are happy to bring it back next year or deal it with some of their other bills. And
And on top of it, since it's not really going to change what they're doing right now. So
no, the current advisory committee on state procurement will continue to exist but not do anything. And as the Senate wills. All right, that's that one. Then there's the easy ones. House Bill 85, temporary licensure for student respiratory therapists. If anyone wants to read the amendment, I can pass it around. It's basically a rewrite with more restrictions and more explicit limitations on what they can do, but it still lets somebody who's finished their first year as a respiratory therapist get a temporary student license and work, which was the whole goal of the legislation. So I was just going to concur and let it go.
That's fine.
Concur?
I'll make a motion to concur.
All right. Any objections? All right, we'll do that one. And the fourth one is regulation of various occupations, House Bill 82. This was a massive cleanup bill for OPLC. The Senate amendment simply sticks in explicit permission for the Board of Electricians to have subcommittees.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
it adds explicit permission for the Board of Electricians to create subcommittees to deal with anything that the full board could do. So they could create a subcommittee on examinations or a subcommittee to consider criminal background checks or whatever. Things that the board already has authority to do.
And that's what I was going to mention. They're not prohibited from creating subcommittees. So
They have been creating subcommittees. Apparently some lawyer said, but you don't have the authority to do that. So
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, let me just, and if we allow this for the if we give them explicit permission,
they'll keep doing what they've been doing.
right, and are they the only board that does that? I mean, what if another board wants to do that, but we've only given explicit permission to one board, or should we just cross that bridge later?
You're right. That's probably something that we'll want to look at. But I'd rather not have a committee at conference to consider every board, which is what we'd have to do. Representative Leon?
Thank you. Perhaps when you're speaking to the concur, if you state that you don't believe that it's necessary, you believe that any board already has this, it was specifically asked here, and we're not limiting any other board to need that authorization. Hopefully they could just look to that legislative intent from your statement. And
Yeah, I'm not sure why somebody said they couldn't have subcommittees because, I mean, they're only to deal with things, but, I mean, I don't think it's necessary, but I don't think it hurts anything.
Clearly, we don't have enough laws.
Clearly. So I'm going to recommend concur unless somebody's got some.
A motion concurrence.
Okay,
I'll second.
all right. Everybody in agreement?
Okay.
Okay,
Doesn't do any harm, it's not prohibited in the other boards either.
okay. And anyone's opposed? All right, the last one is that all four? No, yeah, that is all four. How about that?
I think you said that, the other ones were.
That's four. Okay, that takes care of those guys.
Number four.
All right, so Senate Bill 178, which is the laboratory water testing. Representative Leon?
Yes, I would like to move amendment 2025-1743H for Senate Bill 178.
I'll second.
All right. Representative Leon, you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As I was reading through the bill, most of the bill made a lot of good sense to me, but I couldn't quite understand where the different money was going. So this simply, instead of saying, this was a way to say that all the fees collected should be deposited in the general fund unless this meets one of these exemptions. And then the exemption is to have the special non-lapsing fund established, and then to make the fees collected from other state agencies or from state or federal grants to put 50% of those fees into that lab equipment and replacement fund instead of going to the general fund. It seemed to follow a much more logical path to me that met what the department had explained to me as well. So I think we should pass things that we can read and understand. So I'm hopeful that you'll all support this amendment.
Representative Grota?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right, the motion is to adopt Amendment 1743H to Senate Bill 178, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson,
yes.
Representative Bailey,
Aye.
Representative Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Sellers,
Yes.
Representative Slotchie,
Yes.
Representative Tebow,
Yes.
Representative Grota,
Yes.
Representative Schmidt,
Yes.
Representative Davis,
Yes.
Representative Dargent,
Yes.
Representative Howard,
Yes.
Representative Reese,
Yes.
Representative Long,
Yes.
the chair.
Yes.
Sounds like we full house, 16-0.
Okay, Representative Leon, you have a motion?
Yes, I move ought to pass on Senate Bill 178 as amended by,
With
With
with amendment, 1743H.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Representative Lamb,
No, I don't think more discussion is necessary.
Representative Grote? Anyone else? I want to thank Representative Leon for coming up with this amendment, because I couldn't, when I was reading the bill, I couldn't figure out where the money went. And I think that's a really bad sign. Anyone else?
Actually, and if I may.
Yeah,
Thank you. And I would like to thank the department for discussing this with me so that I could better understand what the flow was through that discussion so that I could then put it in the amendment language. So thank you very much.
okay. Any other comments, questions? All right, the motion is ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 178. And the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson,
Yes.
Representative Bailey,
Aye.
Representative Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Sellers,
Yes.
Representative Slotkin,
Yes.
Representative Grote,
Yes.
Representative Tebow,
Yes.
Representative Schmidt,
Yeah.
Representative Davis,
Yes.
Representative Dargy,
Yes.
Representative Howard,
Yes.
Representative DeVries,
Yes.
Representative Long,
Yes.
and the chair.
Yes.
The same 16-0.
Okay. And this one we don't.
Oh, this one's good on consent.
Okay, does anyone object to consent? All right, seeing none, we'll put it on consent. And Representative Leon, your committee report today.
I will hit send within 30 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay. Senate Bill 180, Representative Slotchie.
Yeah, I assume we're moving amendment 1748H.
I'll second.
Okay. Do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, this amendment hopefully covers what we had discussed as a committee after the hearing. It strikes the second paragraph that somewhat unenforceable, requiring commissioners to work in some sort of extra or provide extra consideration to Coas County. We're not exactly sure how that would be enforced, so that provision is struck, and as well it provides a sunset on the designation of distressed to Coas County with 20 years.
Representative Leon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The section that we're removing, I think is something that hopefully is unnecessary, because I would hope that we don't have any regulations that are unnecessary that are being applied to our citizens or our communities. If they are, hopefully we'll be able to address them as a body to make sure that we're not overly burdening people when it comes to economic development. And I have no problem giving the Coas County a name that they can use in order to try and improve their lot.
All right. Any other comments, questions on the amendment? Representative DeVries.
When I read this, and perhaps I'm looking at an older copy of this, Madam Chair, on line 8, it says section 3 of this act shall take effect July 1, 2045.
Yes, that's,
Is that right?
section 3 is the repeal of the designation, which is in 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we let them use it for 20 years and assume that after that there'll be a new faddish name for distressed economy.
Thank you.
And this is,
Yes, Representative.
as those of us who've dealt with this type of thing before know, this is standard language. You put it in, then you put another section in to repeal it, to sunset it. That's what it's called, a sunset provision, to repeal it at the end of that, at the end of its lifespan. So, standard language.
Relatively Trump's 7th term.
And in 20 years, the legislature can deal with it if there's a new phrase for it, or if Coas County has recovered its economy and is doing much better, they can repeal it sooner. We're happy with that.
I won't promise that I'll still be around to observe the repeal.
Representative Schmidt, none of us have a promise that we'll be here in 20 years. Most of us have hopes.
I didn't say I wouldn't, I just didn't say I would.
No guarantees. Life is like that. All right. Any other comments on the amendment? All right, the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
No.
That was a yes, right? That was a no. Representative Bailey,
Aye.
Representative Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Sellers,
Yes.
Representative Slotchie,
Yes.
Representative Tebow,
Yes.
Representative Grote,
Yes.
Representative Schmidt,
No.
Representative Davis,
Yes.
Representative Dargy,
Yes.
Representative Howard,
Yes.
Representative DeVries,
Yes.
Representative Long,
Yes.
and the chair.
Yes.
Looks like 14 to 2 inexplicables.
Okay, the motion passes. Representative Slotchik?
I'd like to move ought to pass as amended.
Side
With-
note, in eDNA, we are very scrupulous about realizing that we do not have the authority to actually amend a bill. We can only recommend, so it's ought to pass with amendment.
Apologies. With amendment.
There you go. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, same folks as before. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
I don't think I had anything further to add.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment, question Representative Schmidt?
So I will be voting no on this as well, not because I disapprove of what we're doing, but because just because something is not enforceable doesn't mean it's not a good idea. And I hope the record will reflect that we hope that that since it's a very large area and it's in a dire situation, that the lawmakers in the future will consult with the commissioners of Coos County and reflect their views and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay, the motion is ought to pass with amendment, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
I'll make that heavy. Representative Bailey,
Aye.
Representative Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slotchie,
Yes.
Representative Tebow,
Yes.
Representative Grote,
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
No.
There's one in every crowd. Representative Davis,
Yes.
Representative Dargy,
Yes.
Representative Howard,
Yes.
Representative DeVries,
Yes.
Representative Long,
Yes.
and the chair.
Yes.
Okay, 15 to Schmidt. Okay, 15 to 1.
And in order, are you going to be writing a minority report, Representative Schmidt?
I may do that. I may do that because, again, I want the record to reflect that we don't oppose the idea, we just regard it as unenforceable.
All right, please, Representative Schmidt will be writing a minority report, therefore this will not be on consent.
And would that be an ought to pass motion, I believe? Without the amendment?
Well, since it's unenforceable, I'm not sure that a motion ought to pass is appropriate, but I guess it has to be.
Has to
for
be
the- for-
something.
Has to be something. Okay, so
Okay.
I'll do that.
All right. Senate Bill 185, Representative Grote, you had a motion?
Yes, I move to retain Senate Bill 185.
I'll second that.
Okay, well, let's, we should speak to it?
Yes, I will. So there was a concern, there was a concern brought forward by a representative of a board, which we don't want to take lightly. At the same time, the agency is working on a policy and a process by which to address these complaints. So, and in our discussion with them at the beginning of the year, they did mention that they would have something for us in September. So I'd like to retain the bill and see what their solutions are and where they are with their backlog. And that at that time, we'll have time to do something with this bill if we want to make a recommendation for next year.
Okay, Representative Pearson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We looked at this substantially in subcommittee. I was not here when OPLC was created. I was here the term after, and just looking at the ways we've had a lack of patience in allowing this agency to organically evolve. The retaining motion is absolutely in order here. We need to let them do what they're going to do over the next few months, and we can address it at that point.
Okay, I tend to agree. We got some information from the OPLC that they've started to work on it, and I'd love to see if they're making any progress. Okay, all right. The motion then is to retain Senate Bill 185, and the clerk can hold the roll.
185. Wrong. Excuse me, just. Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
the clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson,
Yes.
Representative Bailey,
Aye.
Representative Sheehan,
Yes.
Representative Sellers,
Yes.
Representative Slushy,
Yes.
Representative Tebow,
Yes.
Representative Grote,
Yes.
Representative Schmidt,
Yes.
Representative Davis,
Yes.
Representative Dargy,
Yes.
Representative Howard,
Yes.
Representative DeVries,
Yes.
Representative Long,
Yes.
and the chair.
Yes.
That's 16-0 to retain.
All right, we'll keep that and see what's happening over the summer. All right, Senate Bill 198, New Hampshire Service Dog Week. I'm going to move ITL.
I'll second. Oh,
Tebow seconds.
Cool.
Tebow.
Okay. Fine, and I'll just say that we already have a federal service dog month. And if the supporters of the service dogs cannot get the governor to announce a service dog week in the federal holiday or recognition day, it's exactly shame on them. And I don't,
If they can.
if they can't.
That's exactly the point you're making. So if they can't, and they should, because I think all of us who have any connection with this recognize that service dogs perform a very valuable service. I remember one time, and when I was living in Chicago, I'll take just a second. I saw a service dog walk a blind man into a support pole, and he recognized that, and the dog didn't do its job. The bottom line here is they just imagine what it would be like when you're walking along blind. How useful it is to have someone guide you. So thank you.
Representative Rees?
I'm going to be voting against ITL, and the reason for that is whether or not the service dog organizers can get the governor to pay attention to this. Supporting this gives them something that is state-based in order to promote. There's a lot of misunderstanding in the community around the role of service dogs, and anything that they can do to bootstrap up and get some attention for how it is that the general public should deal with service dogs, the promotion of service dogs, and the support for their charitable purpose, I think is a good idea. And so I'm going to be voting in support of this and against ITL.
Thank you. Representative Tebow, I'm sorry, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just agree with you that this just seems superfluous if they can just request the proclamation from the governor herself. I don't know why it needs to be in statute, because if they can get the proclamation some other way, that still creates the awareness that you're looking for, Representative Breeze. So I just don't see why it needs to be statutory. Thank you.
Who seconded?
Representative Tebow?
Tebow seconded.
My Representative Rees, you have more to say?
Yeah, because I was addressed directly. There are all kinds of things that people can get attention for in numerous ways, including teaching of history in our schools that somebody supported. I don't think that there's anything to counsel against supporting this bill.
I'll answer that. The reason not to put it in statute is that if you've got an active group of people advocating for some cause, and they get the governor to proclaim their day or their week or whatever, great, and they'll keep working on it. If it ever gets into statute, they have succeeded. Therefore, they go away and lose interest. And so you end up with the statute being celebrations that were important at one time but have lost interest. And so we've seen that on a number of different cases. And so we'd rather let the people who are pushing for this, which I can't object to celebrating service dogs, they're valuable, continue to push for it and celebrate it and educate people about them. And my feeling is that if we put it into statute, they won't bother to do it again because it's in the law. We have to do it. And so that's one reason why this committee has been not very supportive of special days. Representative Sitek.
I'd like to ask my favorite question, which is, when is Constitution Day? I think it's important, isn't it, the Constitution? No,
September.
September.
Yeah. And for example, I still treasure the time when somebody was coming in asking for a special day, and I asked them, do you know what today is? And he said, well, it's Valentine's Day. I said, no, it's Congenital Heart Disease Day, which is in statute for February 14th, and nobody ever remembers it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this will be my last point, I promise you, on this bill. However, this organization specifically asked for this because apparently they need to increase the profile of the organization, increase public awareness. And I appreciate the point of, well, they can keep working at it, but we don't know anything. We didn't discuss, or well, at least I don't know, and did not hear the discussion when this bill was offered by its sponsor and the people who are supporting it about how it is that they are staffed and how it is, what resources they have to continue pursuing that with the governor's office. So having worked extensively with small nonprofit organizations, sometimes they don't have the bandwidth to do that. And while it may be something that is not problematic for some of us on this committee to get up to the governor's office, the gentleman who asked for this bill and testified on it, it's probably a little harder for him to do that. So again, against ITL.
Okay, that's fair enough. Representative Sitek?
I really don't want to say more because it might provoke Representative DeVries, so.
No, she's cut off. That's she's silencing herself. Any other comments, questions, issues? All right, then the motion is inexpedient to legislate, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon,
Yes.
the clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Aye.
Representative Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slutchy.
Yes.
Representative Tebow.
Yes.
Representative Grote.
No.
Representative Schmidt.
Yeah.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Dargy.
No.
Representative Howard.
No.
Representative DeVries.
Hard no.
Representative Long.
No.
And the chair.
Yes.
This will take count. 10 to, better be 6. 10 to 6, inexpedient to legislate.
All right, the motion passes. It will not be on consent. Does anyone wish to write a minority report? Representative Long will write a minority report. And it needs to be in today, please. Okay.
I will explain to my constituent, who was a sponsor, one of the promoters of this bill, lives in Dover, our rationale for voting inexpedient on this and urging him to continue his campaign to get the governor to proclaim it.
Okay. I fully support that. All right, Senate Bill 182. Representative Land.
Yes, thank you. I move in expedient to legislate on Senate Bill 182.
Is there a second? I'll second. At least for discussion purposes, Representative Land.
Thank you. Well, this bill was introduced as a simple housekeeping bill to conform the name with the way that it's used at the federal level. This actually makes really broad and sweeping changes to the commission, which raises questions to me about both data validity and violations of Article 2B of the New Hampshire Constitution. Currently, the Commissioner of the Department of Health and Human Services has access to personally identifiable information in the case of maternal deaths only on a case-by-case basis when public health is at risk. With this bill, it would open up the lives and the medical records of all women who died during or within a year of the end of the pregnancy to the Commissioner, including those who die unrelated to pregnancy, and to those who choose to terminate the pregnancy by abortion. As written, this bill would allow the questioning of family members and close associates of a woman who died in a car crash 11 months after having an abortion that may have been a secret to her family members, and providing her identity to the Commissioner. There are other expansions of power for the Commissioner in this bill, including appointing the chair of the panel, which is currently elected by the panel, and allowing panel members to be paid for their participation. I did not see a fiscal note on this bill, and because the Commissioner is able to move people around to positions and then file that for payment with administrative services, this could be a significant financial note. Finally, changing the definition of pregnancy-related death to include the accidental and incidental deaths that are already captured in the other categories within this panel's purview will eliminate the ability to compare trends in maternal mortality before and after enactment of this bill. For this reason, I believe that this bill is an expedient to legislate.
Okay, I have nothing to add. Representative Howard?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. I mean, this is a very important topic. We're talking about situations where potential mothers are passing away, and we need to figure out and understand exactly why that is. And to address the vice chair and her point that was made about the constitutional rights of Article 2B, I mean, it has been reaffirmed by several courts that dead people do not have certain constitutional rights. And when we're talking about privacy provisions in this context, I don't necessarily believe that they are protected in that regard, especially when we're talking about people who are no longer with us. Thank you.
Representative DeVries?
Thank you. That was a lot to process. So I want to talk about what I think it is that this bill does. I think that it's a pretty simple housekeeping bill. The purpose of this panel/committee is to review the maternal deaths that happen every year in order that we can make recommendations about improving healthcare access and provision to mothers. So in the most recent report, the 2024 report, New Hampshire Annual Report on Maternal Mortality, there was, it refers to 6 maternal deaths that happened in New Hampshire. And I believe 2 of those were cardiovascular related. One was, 3 were drug related, and the third was related to a homicide. There are 2 entities that currently under this statute are not at the table, and it's particularly important that they come to the table. So that's one of the things that this bill does, is it adds Department, DCYF and corrections to the subcommittee or panel. That is important because there have been numerous, or maybe not numerous, at least more than one situation where people have said or claimed that DCYF is in, and I am not saying, referring to this as truth, that there is some contribution there by some of our state agencies in the situations that are leading to maternal deaths. We also have a rapidly changing healthcare landscape in the state of New Hampshire. We've got a bunch of maternal deserts that are popping up. And so this group really needs to be active, looking forward in order to reduce the number or the circumstances and the number of potential maternal deaths. So I think that it's important. DHHS asked us for this bill. It asked us to change some of the nomenclature in order to be consistent with what it is that the federal government is referring to these groups as. And I don't see a particular reason, and I'd be happy to discuss this further with regard to the personally identifiable access. They already have access to certain information, their provisions to address that. So I don't really understand what the specific changes are that are offensive, and we shouldn't be moving forward with this cleanup measure. I also will just add that I don't think that the chair being appointed is problematic for the panel/committee.
Okay. Representative Land.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a couple things to address that have already come up. I guess my first is I would ask Representative DeVries if the panel is currently functioning well, and if you believe that they're currently failing in their duty and need to have these changes, or if you believe that they are already functioning well. Secondly, having come from the Health and Human Services Committee and being on the special committee on DCYF, I'm very sensitive to how many charges that division has. They have so many things to do to protect so many vulnerable children in this state. In order to participate meaningfully in this panel, that is going to take somebody who could be looking at one of the facilities that we're sending one of our vulnerable children to out of state. I would not look to have them on the panel simply because right now we need them to ensure the life safety of living children, as opposed to reviewing data that can be reviewed by other people within this panel. As far as somebody from the Department of Corrections, I do see some validity to adding them to this. So I do see that as one thing that is beneficial from this bill, but I don't think that as a package that makes sense, because if you look at the bill, and if you look on page, got it in red, page 4, it spills from page 3 to page 4, because on line 1 of page 4, this is talking about when the commissioner gets access to that personally identifiable information. Currently, it's only when the deaths are on a case-by-case basis where public health is at risk. By striking only on a case-by-case basis where public health is at risk, that opens every single woman who has died within a year of pregnancy, of the end of pregnancy or during pregnancy, it opens up her personal information. That is a broad expansion of intrusion into people's personal information. I do think that Representative Howard made an interesting point. I serve on the Suicide Prevention Council, and I've worked with them in the data subcommittee. We all know that there are certain communities where there are data that say that they're at a higher risk of suicidality. However, there is a huge drive to protect the confidentiality of somebody's gender identity, and they do not want to assume somebody's gender identity after death, because that would be a violation of their personal privacy under the Constitution. I believe that if a person has that right to privacy about their identity and how they, that every woman should have that right to privacy about her medical record because she has died. It shouldn't be opened up to review and debate simply because she happened to die within 11 months or 11 months and 29 days of giving birth or having an abortion. I recognize that having the case-by-case basis with public health at risk is absolutely the vital role of the commissioner, and I would never seek to take that away. However, I don't see the crises that's being presented to us, and it is not simply housekeeping.
Okay. Representative Howard and then Grota. Yes, I saw that. She's spoken once, so it gets everybody else a shot. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To address the Vice Chair's point, I do think that when we're talking about situations where people have committed suicide, that gets into a situation where we're talking about potential defamation. And when we're talking about an individual's reputation, even after they've passed, there are defamation laws that apply to that. However, when we're talking about the constitutionality to the right to privacy, after a person has passed away, they are no longer considered a person by law. And the United States has said time and time again, which you can look into several different court cases, that the right to privacy is not necessarily protected for somebody who is no longer with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to have that definitive statement. Representative DeVries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And a couple of things, I think that you asked Vice Chair Leon, is this committee functioning well or failing? I'm not sure that it is that binary. I think that what the Department of Health and Human Services suggested in introducing this bill was it could be functioning better by getting more parties to the table. So, and thank you very much for agreeing that the Department of Corrections really needs to be at this table. Department of DC, I always have a hard time with that. DCYF, thank you, is they could choose not to attend. It's not mandatory that every person or entity with a seat at the table has to attend. So if they have more pressing business to attend to on any particular day, this does not bind them to attend the meeting. And then with regard to the personally identifiable information, I believe that the reason that this was removed, the reference to the chair shall not acquire and retain any individually identifiable information, that's on page 7, is because that is a language update because currently the chair and the committee do not receive any or do not have access to personally identifiable information. So it doesn't need to be included because they do not currently have it, and this does not proactively, the changes that are suggested here, does not proactively give them access to maternal records or so whether or not, the question of whether or not that privacy exists post passing is sort of moot because they don't have access to that information.
Representative Leon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Representative Howard, I'm not sure how you can say that somebody who has committed suicide has a right to privacy when it's within the purview of the Suicide Prevention Council. But if a woman commits suicide after giving birth, that she somehow should have her information and personal information opened up as well. Where you're splitting the line there, I don't quite agree. I'd have to study the constitutionality of that, but I believe that everybody has a right to privacy and that nobody should be dragged through the mud. Additionally, there's, not dragged through the mud. That was a incorrect statement, so I just want to delete that, me saying that. I do note that as we are opening this up also to speaking to somebody and her close associates as well, when the commissioner has details from the medical record and is having those discussions, I know that everybody will always try to not disclose that information. That's why I'm comfortable. The idea of including close associates is not something that overly troubles me because that's done through the rulemaking process if this were to move forward, because it would be a violation of the public interest in order to have any policies that would disclose personal information or would cause harm to those family members or that woman. So that part about including the close associates is less troublesome to me. But Representative DeVries is actually looking at a different section than the one that bothers me the most. She's looking at line 7 on page 4. And I recognize that that one is no longer important because the information is being given just to the commissioner or designee and not to the chair or panel. However, in line 1, this is where we have the huge expansion of privacy invasion. Currently, and as is appropriate, the commissioner can get that information when the public health is at risk. This is why we have a division of public health. We want to make sure that we can understand why somebody has Ebola or monkeypox or something else that's going to put people at risk. Just because a woman has had a car accident 6 months after birth, that does not put the public health at risk, and it does not reach that bar for me as far as I'm concerned. And lastly, I want to say that I have great confidence in the department and in the commissioner and in this panel. I believe that they are doing phenomenal work, and sometimes it may feel adversarial when we're disagreeing about where to change something in policy. I simply think that oftentimes the department or a commissioner may feel that there's more that they can do and they can do a great job. Sometimes we disagree where that line falls, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that she's doing a fantastic job and that this panel is doing well. I just believe that they have the tools that are necessary now, and that a significant increase in scope on privacy invasion should not be considered just a simple housekeeping bill.
Representative Sytek?
Representative Howard has brought up something I wasn't unaware of and I don't like, even though I can't change it, and that's that the right to privacy does not survive after death. That's something that bothers me, although I can't control that because, as he said, it's been found federally to be so. We happen to have a New Hampshire right to privacy, constitutional right to privacy that was granted, established in our last election, or maybe before. And I wonder what his take on that is, and whether the New Hampshire Constitution might be more restrictive than the federal rules or case law, case law has found. And I'm not sure that has anything to do at the moment, but it's certainly something I think ought to be looked at. And someday some lawyer, enterprising lawyer, will look at whether the right to privacy survives as a matter of New Hampshire state constitution right to privacy. That's it.
Representative Howard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to address the clerk's question, I mean, Article 2B reads an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent, which, as I had stated previously, after a person has passed away, they're not necessarily recognized as an individual.
Okay. Pat, glad to have your professional judgment. Representative DeVries?
I am wondering if there's some opportunity to compromise on this, because it sounds to me like there is agreement in certain areas to move forward with some of these changes, albeit perhaps not all of them. So I think that the point was made that adding corrections in here, adding DCYF, maybe we could come to agreement upon that. And perhaps page 4, line 1, that instead of that being eliminated, that could be added back in.
Representative Lamb?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative DeVries, for the olive branch. Adding DCYF in, given their current pressing need in order to watch out for children who are still alive, is not something that I'm willing to compromise on at this point. If you were willing to look at the Department of Corrections and looking at a smaller bite without including DCYF, perhaps we could consider that. But if it's adding back in DCYF, I want to keep them mission focused at this point.
Anyone else have an opinion, comment, concern? Representative Grote?
So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to retain the bill, how the committee would feel if we could take a straw vote on that, although I think we're in the middle of a motion, to see if there's some sort of, if there's a discussion that we can have on this after we've all had a chance to digest all this conversation.
Retain is always an option. Is there support for this? Let's show of hands right now. That's at least half the committee is voting to retain, so I think that would be an option. Representative Land, would you be willing to change your motion?
Yes, I would, because I think that getting into a floor fight on this at this point or trying to craft a last minute amendment might be a little challenging. So I'd withdraw my ITL, and if the second withdraws it, I'd move to retain this bill.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay. Yeah. Because this looked simple until you started burrowing deeply into it, and so I'll support the motion to retain. Any further comments, Representative Schmidt?
As long as we're going in this direction, having served on the Vital Records Privacy Board for about 5 or 6 years, I think, I've seen a lot of statistics. That's what vital records are all about. And this is a sticky wicket. There's no question about it. right to privacy and so forth, and even statistics where you say that they're not attached to people, right? When you get a small community and something happens, everybody knows or can figure out who that is. And so this is something that is worthy of looking at further. So I'm going to support the retention motion.
Yeah, and I will have to say that if there are 6 maternal deaths in the state, it's going to be very, very difficult to keep it private from those who know any of those people or care to look into it. It's a tiny number. All right. Anyone else have a comment, question? All right, the motion is to retain Senate Bill 182, and the clerk can call the roll.
Vice Chairman Leon.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Aye.
Representative Sheehan.
Yes.
Representative Sellers.
Yes.
Representative Slushy.
Yes.
Representative Tebow.
Yes.
Representative Groda.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Yes.
Representative Dargy.
Yes.
Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative DeVries.
Yes.
Representative Long.
Yes.
And the chair.
Yes.
16-0.
All right,
Retained.
we have another one. Representative Land, you will have the lead on this, and Representative Reeves will undoubtedly be helping you a great deal. Yes, Representative.
I do have a question. So I'd like to, I'm looking at Representative Schmidt. And so right now, it looks like we have 4 bills we have 2 retained and we have 2 bills on consent. So Representative Schmidt, if you write a committee report for the minority on Senate Bill 180, does that mean that it's going to be something that's brought to the floor?
Yes,
Is that what you want, Mr. Representative Schmidt? I just want you to be aware of that.
Something going to be brought to the floor doesn't necessarily mean there will be a debate. There are a number of bills that come onto the calendar, and the speaker almost always says there's no debate on this issue.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thank you.
okay. Yes, we have 1 on consent, 2 with minority reports, and 2 retained. Okay, so that's all of our business unless the Senate decides to amend any of our other bills. If they do, I'll be getting to you around House sessions. And thank you all. If you have anything left in the office, today's the day to clean it out. I have some tote bags if you need them. And Representative Howard and Tebow have arranged our lunch. You care to speak on it?
Yeah, for sure. So if you are all interested in joining us over at Cheers, down off of Main Street, I don't remember exactly what side street it's on, but we will be having a committee lunch. I would hope to see you all there. Thank you.
I'll second his motion.
Where's,
All right, thank you.
I'm not sure where, do you know where Cheers is?
Yeah, it's on Stores, actually, about a block. I think it's
Stores.
Depot Street.